Hello everyone and welcome to this video where we are going to be taking a look at fluid transfer. We're going to use the new value that we have for flow rate, but if you remember a few months ago I did this test that took a look at finding the best solution for a single pump. So it was pretty much taking a pump, pumping out of this top chamber, using this and going into the bottom chamber. We took a look at the results, compared them, and found that number 3 here was the optimal solution for one pump. It ended up with 1,000 liters more than the first one here after only a few seconds. And what it does is it uses 2 points of intake through the singular pump, has a gas relief valve after that, and then it has 2 points of release of the liquid with 2 fluid relief valves. So it is a simple system and a singular system that we're now going to expand on. But before we begin, let's run this test again just to get ourselves a refresher. So right now the liquid is flowing and it's falling from that top chamber to the bottom. If we stop it here, take a look at the first one, we have just over 3,000, second one just under 3,000, and over here we have 3,500. And of course it'll compound. When this is 6,000, this will be much higher, maybe 7 or 8,000. So that is just with this singular system. Now the rest of these tests don't really matter and we're not going to take a look at them, because they were slower. But what I'm going to do now is have that new value that we can take a look at for the flow rate, and we'll expand on the systems with this as our starting point and adding pumps in parallel, in series, and seeing what kind of values we can get. Now I went ahead and made all 7 tests identical with the one that we had as our third case or best case, but what I want to do first is actually dumb the first one down even more, so it's only going to have a single point of intake and a single point of fluid leaving. And the reason for that is just so we have this as a baseline, because of course this is for educational purposes. So if you do not have this setup with the dual intake, dual fluid leaving, you're going to have something like this, and this will be our baseline case. In fact, our baseline case won't even have that. We're going to have this one be that, whereas this one won't even have these filters. So right now, this one is as dumb as it gets. It's literally pumping everything here into everything here. So you're pumping both the liquid and gas into this bottom one. That is if you don't use any filter whatsoever. So then this one will be using a filter. So we already in previous videos did determine that this setup was better than this setup. So now we're going to have all 3 side by side, starting with the most basic possible example, going into this one here. So these are all going to be single pump setups. Now in here right now we have this pressurized system, or rather than having our basic fluid or gas relief valve. So what I'm going to do actually is go ahead and remove all these, and we're just going to put in this top tank as well another one of these gas relief valves. So what we're going to end up with is a tank that is not pressurized going into a tank that is not pressurized. And then all these buttons, of course, can be removed. So now we have a very basic setup of just pump versus pump. Of course, in the first one, we're just having a very simple setup. And even like I said, this one had no filters. This one has the filters. This one is what we determined to be the best. So starting in this case, what we'll do is we're actually going to take this setup and duplicate it. So it's going to be 2 of these tests running in full parallel, side by side, just like this. So you see now we replicated the systems, and the only thing I'm going to remove is that filter. So we're just going to have the same tank with 1 filter into the same tank with 1 filter. But of course the setup's running in complete parallel. Now, parallel, meaning it doesn't interfere or intersect at all. Meaning for this next one, we're actually going to put the pumps in series. So I'm going to take this pump, place a copy right here, actually not right there. We're going to place a copy right here, and then convert or converge these paths together. So just like I have here, we're going to take this and have this. Now, I do believe parallel is better than in series like this, but until you try, how can we possibly know? And of course, until we have a value that can go into this, that's what these experiments are for. So now it's going to be pumping out of here, through this pump, and into this system. So in this case, what we will have to do is take a summation of the flow rate, because of course in this one here, we can just add it, whereas here we can't add it, because we actually, if we sum this with summing this up, it's going to give us a different number. Now, maybe we could just take the flow rate from this pump as it is, and see if having two of them like this in sequence gives us any sort of different value. But that's what I'm going to run there, just two pumps, one after the other. Now, what if we share some of this piping? Meaning, if we have this pump like this, but rather than being in full parallel like you have here, we actually piggyback and use piping to give us kind of a system that uses these. Now, again, I don't think this is going to be better than the other one, just because the pipes themselves have sort of what you'd call a limitation of the maximum value that can go through them. So I think we'll end up with a situation where this might be a little better than having your single pump system, test number 3, if you will here, but I don't think it's going to be as good as having them in parallel like this. And finally, for test number 7, just because I'm going to hedge my bet and say that the one that we put in number 3 or 4 here will be the best, this one with the full parallel, I'm going to hedge my bet and say let's just try right off the bat to have 3 pumps, or rather 3 full parallel systems. So we take this, we're going to place it here like we did, and then we're going to place another one on that other side as well. So you can see here we have 3 of them, 3 systems in complete parallel. I'm just going to seal off this chamber here and here. So what I think is that this will be the best. Now, one thing that I'll have to do is connect this flow rate. Now, actually, I just had a second thought. Instead of summing up the pumps here to get a total flow rate, let's just take an extract of the single pump system and get a feel for what is going on. So would the system here through this single pump be any different than in the system where you have 3, or one of this case like this? So would it actually impede the pump itself? Because we're going to know the number of the liquid that's transferred itself. So we're not going to be surprised by that. The one thing that we will know, and the one thing we can follow, is to see that flow rate. Another thing I've done as a control variable, just to make sure that all the tests are the same, is each one of these systems has its own battery. So none of them are sharing batteries. There can't be drainage of battery more than one and the other. So that is consistent and the same. For this test, I will have infinite electricity on, just because, of course, 3 pumps will draw more power than the single pump. So we have to keep that power consistent. And finally, all of them are attached to that single button here. One little thing that was overlooked is not having the gas relief valve here. So the tanks are in essence open and pretty much spilling. So I'm just going to add that. All right, here we are, the moment of truth. We're going to start the system. And you could see, just looking at these numbers of the pumps, they are different, in fact. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Now, they are dropping as well. And I found that the pumps kind of start off strong and then find themselves dropping. So I'm not sure if they're going to find an equilibrium or if they're just going to keep dropping in flow rate. But for a little snippet in time, I just paused it. You could see that we have pretty much 200 here, 199 on the first test, or 201 in the second test. So first one being plain old nothing, no filters, and then here we have the filters. So we are getting a little better in the one with the filters. Now take a look at that. 233 in this one. So that explains literally the difference we have with the dual intake and dual fluid leaving the system. Okay, now it gets interesting. 160 when we have the fourth setup. So when we have the two pure in parallel systems, meaning two fully independent pumps running at the same time, we're actually dropping the efficiency to 160. Now this is something that I remember reading, and if you have a ballast tank and you have a bunch of pumps pumping the same tank, the efficiency actually drops. So you could see that value from going from a single pump to two pumps, it actually drops. But of course, what you have to think is that this value is actually multiplied by 2. So we're not actually getting 160, we're getting 320. Okay, so 320 is still better than this one by 100 liters per second, but, or just under. But the whole point is that it does drop in efficiency. And actually comparing here to the third case, where we have 3 in parallel, we're getting 130. Now, of course, 130 multiplied by 3 is 390. So that is where those values kind of come in. So we're actually losing efficiency the more pumps we have in parallel. And that's not even accounting for the fact that we have to still put in all these nodes and stuff. Now, ignoring that fact, like I said, from this one to these guys here, number 5 and 6, we have the pump that is in series, and we have this one that's sharing piping. Now, the one that is sharing piping is absolutely the worst. It's sharing piping, and it's getting 78. So you could still multiply that by 2, but it's getting 156. So it's still getting a value way worse than even your most basic possible case here. The one that's interesting is this one here, which is test 5, which has the 2 running in parallel. It is getting 233, which is the same number as test number 3. So adding the pump didn't gain us anything. It's just pumping the maximum amount that that pump does, and it doesn't seem to get us anything. Now, if we stop these systems, we can just do a quick look at the values. So we're just over 4,000 here. We're just under 4,000 here. Here we have 4,600 or 4,700. Now here we have 6,800. In this case, we have 4,600, so it's actually worse by 5 liters than the one that just had the one pump. So that one doesn't work at all. This one has 4,000, so compared with 4,600 here. And this one has 8,400, so it is the 3 pumps in full parallel. Of course, like I predicted, it is getting the best value, 8,400, and that is better than this guy here, which is the 6,800, and of course the one singular pump system. So really, we can take a look at this test now with just 3 of these tests rather than all 7. So pretty much in this case, test 3, 4, and 7, they're the valid ones. Of course, the first one starts as our kind of establishing test or establishing factor, but you can see that while efficiency does decrease overall, you still get an increase of speed. So it is improving, it's just not doubling. And that will continue on. The more pumps you add, that will happen. At some point, it will plateau. And I imagine if you have 8 pumps or 10 pumps or whatever, you'll find that it's not even doing any different because you've almost equalized the value that the flow rate is versus the multiplication factor you're adding there for the extra pump. So we know that tests 5 and 6 were not successful. So what we're going to do is actually try something different here. What I'm going to do is, instead of what we're trying to do here, which is to use the large pump, I want to see, just out of curiosity, how efficient it is to use a small pump. And in that case, what we'll do is we'll try with 1. And of course, we'll know that that will be much weaker. But then we'll try with 2 in full parallel and see what kind of values that gives us versus the single pump setup here. So does this single pump setup give us better value than having a double pump setup of the smaller variant. Now, it's almost not even fair to include this one. Of course, we know it's going to be the worst, but the reason for adding this one is just to serve as kind of our establishing case, to just give us an idea of how much slower it is than the one with the single large pump. So everything's connected. Of course, we could compound this and add 3, add 4, and see at what point these ones are better than this, and maybe I get to that at some later point. But for now, I just want to get myself a feeling for 2 of these versus 1 of these. Starting the system up, we know that it goes quite high and then starts to drop down, so we're going to kind of wait for that to drop down. But as you see here, we're steadily climbing. Those are the ones with 1 single pump here, and with the 1 single large pump. So once we kind of hit 4,000, we'll stop. But interesting enough here, these are getting interesting numbers. All right. Actually, let's kind of pause it for a second. So, again, to look at these flow rate values. So 184, 186, 215. So that's these first 3. Now this one here that we know is in full parallel, it's getting close to 150. Now we're getting 240 in the single pump situation. Interesting. And we're getting 140 in the parallel situation of the regular small pumps. So that would actually imply that the single pump setup is going faster than all of these. And this one here, doing 140, is actually getting 280 liters per second. So in this one here, test number 6, versus this one here, that's getting just a little higher. It's getting, if I multiply it, it's getting 296. So these two seem to be quite similar in that case. Now, if I let it run a little longer, like I said, do they reach equilibrium, or does the value just keep dropping? But let's compare the value of what transferred over. So 5,200, just under 5,200, 6,000. So again, we know. But let's take a look now at this. So 5,600 and 7,100. Interesting. All right. So that means the best situation, which is test number 3 with 1 pump, is still not as good as the same test with the 2 small pumps. It's getting 1,000 liters more. Now, of course, having the 2 large pumps in full parallel is getting us 8,700 compared to the 7,100. So that does tell us that having the 2 large pumps still is better than having 2 of the smaller pumps. But it's quite interesting. You're better off putting the 2 small pumps than 1 large pump. Just for fun, to wrap this test off, what if we just have the 2 small pumps with no other filters? So the simplest possible system we could think of versus the one over here, which is the large pump with the simplest system you could think of. So in this case, if we let this test run, I'm quite curious to see the numbers we're going to be getting. We'll let it turn on. Now I didn't put the flow rate there. Fixed, so now it's actually running with the flow rate, and I'm quite curious to see what we're getting. But you could see, comparing this one here with this one here, the values are quite similar. This one is less, so it is proving that having those filters, or that filter configuration, is advantageous. But take a look at this. We're getting 4,600 for the one there with all the filters, where we're getting 5,200 for the pumps there with nothing. The most basic possible system. Now, I don't know if this is a bug, just actually, this is my first time seeing these numbers, because in this case, our simple large pump system gets us 3,600, whereas if we have the pump filter setup that we have here with the little valve going out and the gas going out and the liquid going in, we get 4,200. Okay, comparatively to this, we get 4,700 for the 2 pumps with those filters. How are we getting 5,200 for the regular pumps? That means that, let's let the test continue. That means running 2 parallel small pumps is actually more efficient and better than running even, okay, we're at 6,700. Okay, we're at 5,500. So running 2 small pumps in the most basic possible configuration is still proving better than running 1 large pump with all the fancy filters. So test number 3 with its fancy filters versus this plain simple 2 pump setup is substantially better. It's more than 1,000 liters better in this case. So something's not adding up. I'm not quite sure why this is proving to be the best setup. I thought that the pumps are supposed to perform and behave in the same way, but of course now we're seeing that the small pump is not requiring this elaborate setup of the filters, and in fact is quite happy to work without any of those filters. I'm going to end this video on that, so let me know in the comments what you think of this test, what other tests we can do. Of course, I could visualize some other ones that may be useful, such as comparing having these small pumps, like 4 small pumps, and of course they wouldn't even take up that much space, versus another configuration of these large pumps with their filters, versus just these pumps here, versus a configuration with this filter valves and all kinds of other stuff. But right now that's actually showing a quite interesting value that we can quite easily make a system using these small pumps that actually are super easy to use because they only take up kind of 1 block like this, versus these guys which you have to take up 4 sort of blocks in height, and then you have to have them pop in out of the different sides and whatnot. So I mean, after seeing this, I would put like 6 of these things with no filter, nothing, and just let them roll. So it seems that that may be the way to go. Anyways, let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for more videos. Stay tuned for more creations. And as always, happy Stormworksing, everyone. See you next time.